Well, hey, this is Cabin Conversations, a regular podcast here at Woodlands Church. I'm Dave Bonison here with co-host Whitney Swenson. That was a little different, Whit.
Oh, I know, but are we on a streak 3 now?
Yes, this is 3.
We're marking our streaks.
Yeah, so
he changed it from a weekly podcast to a regular.
We're not weekly. We're regular. We're very regular.
Pretty regular.
But sometimes we don't do this thing.
Yeah.
So this is week 3 of weekly podcast. Here with our guest, Senior Pastor John Uten.
Yeah.
I always like using the title. I don't know why.
I've noticed that. That's
yeah.
nice.
I've taken that with David Hansen too. I'm like, Executive Pastor David Hansen, when he walks into the room and he's like, hey, Dave.
That's how I have Catherine refer to me. It's really helped our marriage.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Later, you get marriage tips with Senior Pastor, soon to be single, John. There we go. So good. Hey, thrilled to have you joining us as we're processing. One of the things that we're asking our guests right out of the gate as we're talking, because this is the second time you're on. You were on like...
This is number 3.
This is number 3.
This is number 3?
Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I thought this was just the second time because we canceled on you one time.
Yeah.
All right. That was going to be the third.
I knew it was number 3 and I knew I was probably ahead, but
Yeah.
it was okay because I like to spend time with you guys.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
I like having conversations.
Did we talk about your reading habits? We did.
Yeah.
Oh, I
we
remember
did.
that conversation so well. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Here's the sad thing is that my walk this morning, I thought, this is his third, so we need a new question. And
Oh.
I thought of a new question on my walk.
Amazing.
Did I bring it up into this room in my brain? I didn't.
It's
I
not
left
there
it-
in your
left
brain.
it.
Oh, it's back at the walk.
No.
It's back in the sunshine.
How
end
do
of the
you
field.
remember things you need to remember? That's the third
Yeah.
round question.
It's
No,
easy.
this is great.
No, I know what my question was.
Okay.
Ooh,
Is it okay?
Yeah,
Can I
go
ask
for
it?
it.
I'm
Go
so
for it.
excited.
What does community look like for you, John?
Like
Like what
for
is gathering?
John's life or
Yeah.
like in general, like how far to describe community?
No, these are personal questions.
Yeah.
These are
So-
personal questions. What does it look like for you? You've moved out of a community and
For
into a new
sure.
community. So how are you building community? What is it? So I don't want to say what does a group look like because I feel like when we narrow gathering together to group life,
Yep.
like the way that we've described life groups, we are missing a broad swath of what community looks like. So what does community look like for you? How are you building it here?
What a good question.
I
Those are
know.
really good
Coming from the community person.
Super shocking. I think that for me right now, there's different levels in which your community looks like as you continue to live in a location. And so,
Mhm.
for right now, it's how
That
do
was my microphone. Sorry.
Funny noise. Anyway,
We're doing
sorry, John.
sound
Yeah.
effects now.
Back to profundity.
When I say something bad, it's like,
He's
Anyway,
got
I have
buttons
some,
over there.
but
Did you know he had buttons?
I'm not going to use them. So I don't know which ones they are.
Kind
So.
of makes me sad. So when you move into a new place, you kind of have to change your expectations of what it
Yeah.
used to be.
Mhm.
I think back when I was living in Texas and we moved from Texas to Minnesota, the community I had there was built over living there for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And you have friends that you've done some serious life with. You've cried and wept together. You've cheered and celebrated kids together. And that's a type of community that is really, it's rich and it's deep and comes easy when you find yourselves needing community. As you move, or when we moved, you kind of have to reshape that because you're not going to get that right away, not unless you're going to be there for another 30 years. And so you have to be proactive in creating community, creating vulnerability with other men in your life. And so I did that. And then now moving here, it's just kind of like starting at zero again.
Right.
And so, part of it is finding those people that you resonate with and wanting to start to build that sort of community with. And I found that some here on staff, there are brothers and sisters in the Lord that I'm building this community with. And then even out in our church body, it's kind of cool to make quick connections with people. It starts in the lobby, but then it goes to a coffee. And so just starting to build that up. We miss that sort of a thing. Kath and I were just even talking about it last week where she saw somebody who she was trying to do something on Facebook, like order something. And so she saw like friends of ours that were still hanging out, and you think, oh man, we miss that.
Yeah.
And so it just looks different. You kind of have to change your expectations.
Yeah.
And then you just, you go for it. Just because we don't have that today, it doesn't mean it can't be developed over some years.
Right.
And, it's different. We're in a different season of life. We're not going to share the birth of a baby. but we can definitely celebrate other things. And so building that community is a process, and it feels like starting over. And when you move or you go through something, I think that's what it feels like.
I think one of the things you just said is so profound, that a lot of our expectation of community maybe was furthered when we had good community at certain stages of life that created really profound experiences.
Yep.
And that going from unmarried to married is one of those seasons. And then going from married without kids to married with kids. But you've made that transition with a group of people. There's an affinity and a connection that's really hard to find when you're in the crazy life stage that we all are in, which is kids at home.
Right.
Our expectations of what community can look like, maybe should look like, outside of our home, really needs to adjust for that. I think this is such a heavy thing to process, especially at this stage of life that you're at, John, where you're brand new to this area, or not brand new. You've been here for a good 5 months now.
5 full months.
So
let me know if you need any questions. I know where the good egg rolls are.
Do you still use Google Maps to get around Stevens Point, Clover?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, who am I kidding? I do too. I had to find somebody's house, and I was like, "Where is?"
I used it to find the DUC the other day.
Oh, you did not.
I do not know where that building is in the university. And I was teaching at IV. I'm like, listen, my dad was a professor here. He graduated undergrad. My daughter's going here right now. Like, my life is all centered around university, and I still need to use Google Maps to find the DUC.
Yeah.
Okay, so herd expectations is one thing that needs to shift. And I think had when we've been able to rewind 7 years, and you told me that, when I shifted from being a part of a small group where we went from newly married couple, some singles in our group that then got married, had kids, went through all of the like highs and lows of having kids.
Right.
And then we're with that group for 5 more years, and then we felt the call to leave and lead a different group. I didn't change my expectations, and it was like a slap in the face.
For sure.
And it was a phenomenal group. Like the group we were in was incredible, and then we went to a phenomenal group where there was just a real deep hunger for more community. Brian and I already had it, and so I didn't shift my expectation to be like, oh, I need to be fostering it here too.
Yeah.
Man, there's just something to be said about shifting, about knowing what your expectations are.
Yeah. And
I think even just being able to put your finger on it.
Yeah. And I think that our expectation is always our best experience in the past.
Yeah.
Which isn't always fair, and so
that's a really good observation.
You kind of chase the ghost, so to speak, after that, all the while missing the new community that you might be experiencing. And, as another aside, I think that in our family, amongst, Catherine, Eden, Nanny, Samuel, and Wyatt, and myself, the community that is our family has really grown in these transitions. Sure. And that doesn't mean there hasn't been tension or strain in the moving, but it does mean that we have now gone through more together as a family, and have been able to even mourn with one another, agree with one another, or celebrate with one another. And that's not to say they don't always get in arguments around the Newton house. It happens with teenagers. But it does mean that our community is deeper frankly, the community that I believe matters the most. Like my children will always have each other, hopefully. And even if they move, they still have their family community. So it's been a kind of a cool way to see how even our family has developed when we've been trying to find community, and we haven't been able to have it in our normal places. We've been able to find it in our family.
I've got to preach a moment.
Preach.
So, no, and we were processing this last week in the car. I'm settling into this in modern evangelicalism to an extent. So not preaching here. I'm just observing and processing. I think that there's this elevation of friendship that's really rich and really good, but I don't see it in the Bible. And what I see in Scripture profoundly in Genesis 2 is it's not good for man to be alone. And so God creates a spouse. And there's this friendship and this community and this relationship that's formed in the family profoundly. Now that can be replicated in a number of different ways. And it's provided in Christian community. And I think that there's a familial language that Jesus uses in the church that shouldn't be ignored.
But it's also familial language for a reason.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I think that's the most profound experience of community that God created for us in the garden. We should just continue to just sit in the amazement of like Adam in perfection, without sin, in God's presence, not good, needs another. And so this image of God longing for relationship conception that happens there in Genesis 2. And I hope that husbands who are hungry for friendship are looking for friendship in their wife first.
Right.
And wives who are hungry for friendship are looking for friendship in their husbands first.
Thanks for preaching for that, Dave.
Yeah. So it's just it's a deepening conviction I have. And you mentioning the community that your family has found in within itself in this transition, I think is beautiful.
And think about the things that we want in community. We want accountability, we want friendship, we want support, we want enjoyment, encouragement. What a beautiful thing when we can find that inside these lifelong commitments we make to another person. Yeah, even as siblings, right? Like that's a commitment you make that you didn't want to necessarily, that you didn't have a choice.
Forced commitment.
Like you're committed to being brothers and sisters no matter what. That was a forced commitment, but there's a commitment there. And when we live out our relationships inside of these lifelong commitments, we're able to maybe even get through some things that we wouldn't normally have gotten through, you know? If you ever think about in a marriage, if you've had a marriage that's gone through a tough spot, if this was just a normal person in your life, you'd probably be like, you know what? Have a good one. We'll catch up in eternity. It'll be okay. But as a spouse,
I'll wait for God to sort you out. Sure. See you on the other side.
And they're saying the same thing about you.
Exactly.
But then in a committed lifelong relationship that you've made a commitment before the Lord with, you now are forced to go into these deeper levels of community, deeper levels of commitment that you experience more of what that looks like, which ironically points us towards who the Lord is and his commitment and our commitment towards him. And, while we continually probably, make him mad, he still is committed to loving us with all
sacrificially
pursuing us. Yeah.
Super cool. What a great question. I'm excited to get third-time guests on. Nice job, Whitney. Let's go.
What was the question I didn't answer? You asked a lamer question. What was
it? Was lame. It was more procedural. It was like, how do you remember stuff?
Yeah.
Like, how do you keep track of tasks?
Yeah,
how do you manage your life?
I email myself.
Oh, good. See, there you go.
Yeah, Rick Satterthwaite used to cross his fingers for things that he had to remember. There were times there were so many things.
He was sitting at like all staff and he had like 4 fingers crossed or something like that.
I just love that, man. Oh, I miss Rick. But that was great. He would just like at what point do you remember what
I've done it. I've done it too. And
then, at what point do you just uncross your fingers unknowingly because they are cramping?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I forgot my thought.
And then you didn't remember what you were supposed to do.
I just email myself.
Yeah. Email yourself.
That works.
I have texted myself before. So just not like unopened it.
So cool.
Or ask somebody else to text me.
Well, hey, let's talk about that's one of the things I do a lot. If someone's like, hey, can you do this? I'm like, yep, if you email me about it, or if you text me, but if I walk away with the expectation I'm going to do that, ain't happening. So you let me know.
Help me remember.
Let's chat about Sunday. John, I caught you after service and I just said, I loved Sunday's service so much for so many different ways. I thought the worship team just did phenomenal. I thought the order of the service, the focus on Christ is the central element of that service. Like just this desire to gather together to encourage one another and fixing our eyes on Christ was so rich. Yeah. It was so good. It felt so community. It was like church. I love it.
It felt like church.
Left there. But I wanted to start off by saying you started by talking about the elder retreat. And I have all in caps. We talked about our elders in church and had a picture. So I loved that.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the meeting rhythm of the elders, because that's unique at Woodlands Church.
It is pretty unique. I mean, I've served at different churches that have had different rhythms in how they meet, and different churches do go about this differently. Some meet once a month, and they just have a big meeting. And so
most do, I think.
Like usually it's like a 4-hour meeting, and they meet and try to discuss, the business of the church. And in Minnesota, we met every other week. And sometimes those meetings would be an hour and a half, and sometimes it'd be 3 hours, but every other week. This church, I think for a very, very long time, our elders meet every Wednesday morning at 6:15 in the morning. And it's every week. And so what that does is it kind of builds a different type of community. Back to community is the elder board has their own places that they're involved and they have community, but in and of itself, it's a bit of a community because we kind of have this shared responsibility, this shared stewardship of being overseers of the church. And so it's a neat group of men. I mean, it's an amazing group of guys who love Jesus and are committed to just following him. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to start to have, and it's been this way in different times, I think, but annually we want to take a day, a night, and a day to get away, pray, spend more community time together, eat with one another, break bread, share in communion, and talk less rushed and more deeply about other issues that we're seeing and looking ahead. And God, where are you calling us to go? What are you calling us to do and be? And to just slow down. And so that's what we did, and it was a really sweet time, a really great time to be together and walking away and feeling the unity in that particular community was pretty amazing.
Yeah,
it's a blessing that sometimes you can easily take that for granted, and that's not the case everywhere, sadly.
Yeah. Even you talking about different rhythms, I think people that have lived in this body, have grown up and stayed in this body, don't know that there's different rhythms. Sure. So some of the things that Woodlands does is just how church is done.
Right.
You don't recognize that there are other options, that there are even other rhythms, or there's possibility for unhealth. What you feel here is as a healthy church, there's potential for that not to be. So there's a lot of reasons to be.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed, we tend to be, and it's just, I think it's fair, like we tend to be fairly critical people. And so when you swim in healthy waters, you find things to criticize because that's just our nature.
Yep.
That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's really easy to take that on health for granted. And I think the meeting rhythm and the health of the elders leading this church has been one of those things that's really, really easy to take for granted.
Right.
I know churches where elders have torn apart the church. I know churches that meet, larger churches than us, these elder boards meet once a quarter. Think about the deliberate leadership that they're exercising over the church. It's pretty minimal.
Right.
And so to be able, the other thing that I was reflecting on is this: you guys still haven't used guys. Use guys.
Wow.
Hey, we're here in the Northwoods Day. Yeah. These guys don't, you still, this is all elders. Like you are the newest elder on the team.
Yep.
So, all of these elders have been appointed prior to you coming on. These were all elders that affirmed your candidacy.
Right.
As senior pastor, which is kind of super cool.
It's pretty unique. I mean, I'll never have a first elder board at Woodlands Church like this group of men, and I even shared that with them on the retreat. Is you guys will always be special for me, because the Lord does call people on and off the elder board, and we have term limits to just kind of even help that. And so it is a board that changes. What doesn't change is that every single person on that board, I believe, is called by the Holy Spirit to be on that board. It's not. We can sometimes use the word board, and actually the Bible doesn't use the word board. We just use that word. This group of men are responsible for some pretty amazing oversight of the church, and all of them are volunteers except for me. I would volunteer, but these are men that they do this because they feel the love for the church, and to be able to be in a room with guys like that is a huge privilege for me. And you're right that the terms of health of a board and how they meet and what they're for. I was with a group of pastors several weeks ago, and we were talking about elder boards, and some of them said, well, our board is the one, they just set policy for the rest of the church. And when we asked, well, how do they offer care or discipleship? And no, that's actually not what our elder board does. They only set policy. That's one way to do a board. Others say that they don't do any policy. They have a business group that does that, and all they do is care and prayer and that sort of a ministry. So it's really interesting how different churches approach what it means to be an overseer, because it can mean at some point in time one or the other. And I'm really thankful for how we approach it here. I think we approach it with a kind of a balance between those two. They do need to be careful and be mindful of policy and how we administer the church. But at the same time, these are men that at the core of who they are, they care and they love, they pray for the church. It's a beautiful group of men.
Yeah, super cool. So we launched a new series here.
We did. Church on the Move.
New, also a continuation. Like if this is just chapter 2 of a broader book.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll come back. I mean, the intention is to finish Acts.
Yeah.
By and large, we might take a year to do it or so.
That's all right.
Or a year and a half.
For sure. I mean, it's kind of a big book.
There's a lot of chunk in there.
It has some pretty natural shifts and natural breaks in it, which is kind of nice for sermon planning. But I'm really excited about continuing through the book of Acts. One of the reasons why I think it's fun to go through the entire book is that as we delve into some of the epistles and different letters in the New Testament even, it gives us a sense of where those sit inside even history. Mm-hmm. So context will help us understand all of Scripture even better. And when we go through Acts, we can really understand, so this is where the book of Galatians came in, right? Mm-hmm. After St. Paul's first missionary journey, and they had these questions about what really is the gospel. Is it for grace or works? It enters the book of Galatians. Mm-hmm. And so kind of a neat opportunity to set that foundation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you have any standout points for you, Whitney? I have a little thing that I'll jump into.
Little ditty. Yeah. The one thing I highlighted so we were in Acts 5, 17 through 42. Mm-hmm. The one line I highlighted was from the angel of the Lord speaking to the apostles and telling them, go and stand in the temple and tell the people all about this life. And just the effect that that's what this is all spinning off of, right? Mm-hmm. That this go, you know what the gospel is, go and tell about it. And right. And even in singing, turn your eyes upon Jesus. It's like, his word's not going to fail you. He promised that. Believe him, all will go well. And then go to a world that's dying.
Yeah.
Is perfect salvation to tell. Just like that. That's what we're called to do. We're called to understand the gospel and then go with it. Yeah. So that was, I mean, there's a lot of other things we could jump over on. I think sitting in this passage with a couple of ladies on Friday morning, the wisdom of Gabby Allard talked about hardship losing its teeth in the light of the gospel, in light of who Jesus is. And then you hit on it too, John. And I'm not sure if you said this or if I just started like writing things down, like, what are you afraid of when you got to fear of God over fear of man? Mm-hmm. And just to ask yourself what you're afraid of and what these guys could have been afraid of rejection, isolation, shame, death. I got to death, wrote down death. I'm not sure if you said it or not, but I was like, they just watched their leader experience the most excruciating death.
Right.
And rise from the grave. Mm-hmm. What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
You know, like again, repeat the question, what is it? What is there to fear? Yeah. So that's what I'm spinning on.
That was one of my big takeaways. It was interesting because there were a couple times that I wrote questions and then you answered them in the next point, which was super cool. Like
well done, John.
We were in a little conversation that you didn't know. But your first point was courage rooted in obedience. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to follow God's call. And I was just processing, I wrote here, interesting tensions. I think the level of necessary courage is related to the size of your vision of God, which always goes back to me. There's this exchange, I've shared it before, I've preached on it, in Isaiah, where God tells Isaiah to strip down naked and preach. And like Isaiah just does it. And then God's like, hey, you've been doing it for 3 years. And it's this like, what courage did Isaiah have? And I've always related that to Isaiah 6. Mm-hmm. Like when you've stood at the foot of the throne of God and you've seen God, like when he says move, you're just like, cool. All right, that's great. This is clearly the best thing I can do for the next 3 years is preach naked, because I know the size of God. And that was the exact next point that you had then was fear of God over man. Just this amazing statement in Acts 5:29 where Peter says, we're going to follow God, not man.
Right.
And so it is this, if you want to grow in courage, like if you want to grow in gospel-shaped courage, grow in your vision of God. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we use the word fear, and sometimes that we think of that in the wrong way. We think of it as a dreading fear, a fear of that God's going to strike us, though He is mighty enough to do so. And I think that having that vision of how big God is. And one of the phrases that I like to say is the fear of God is the remedy of the fear of man. When we understand who God is and his awesomeness and his power, and why would we fear man? If you look in Scripture and you just start to look at all the different passages that talk about the fear of God versus the fear of man, you see, like God is just that big, and there's nothing to be afraid of. If you're going to be afraid of something, be afraid of something that's real. God is the one who is the ultimate. He's the real. There's one passage I can't remember. I'm gonna butcher the quote, but it talks about man can destroy the body, but God can destroy the soul.
Yeah,
and so you kind of think like, oh, well, body doesn't seem like that bad anymore. You can take that, but God's so much more powerful. And I think I was thinking about the fear of man just even today. Like, what does that look like? There's a part of fear that the fear of man doesn't come from like the outside world so much, but I think when I actually feel this fear of man, it's people that are close to me that aren't really doing it on purpose. It's just you fear disappointing them, or you fear conflict you might have with a friend, and so the fear of man often comes in close relationships, not these distant ones, but they're the close relationships where you're afraid that you might let them down, or you're afraid that you might hurt them, or they might disagree, or you'll have conflict with a person who's close to you. That's where the fear of man really comes into play.
Yeah. It's a challenge in every, and it's a good self-reflective piece, that those questions, well, what am I afraid of? And really sitting in that.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of letting so-and-so down.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of, offending such and such.
I think there's a place for hurt too. Like if you've been hurt. So I was listening to a new song by Ellie Holcomb called Brick by Brick. And she's written it, I think, so her husband's Drew Holcomb. He's like, she wrote it about me, but I'm like, she might have wrote it about Jesus. I don't know if they're Christian folk. But it's talking about like being hurt by the world and then just brick by brick, like isolating yourself in.
Right.
So I'm not going to be hurt again. So I'm going to
for sure
build this brick, and then talking about like this patient love that brings down the bricks and heals what has been hurt. So I think I think fear can look like that too.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting too to think about, like I think you made the statement Peter then versus Peter now.
Right.
And there's an encouragement there of looking at the disciples walking with Jesus for the years that they got to walk with Jesus, and slowly understanding more and more of who he is, but also like getting ahead of themselves and thinking they knew it. Like they would see a glimpse of, oh, you can provide food. Cool. We're going to be in a boat with you, and forget that. You're the provider,
right?
But you're not also the one that calls nature into submission to yourself, right? Like, oh, who are you, right? So that just this like slow revelation of who God is, bigger and bigger vision grew as they walked with him.
Yeah.
It was a slow revelation, a slow learning and unlearning in a sense for them, sometimes getting ahead of themselves and having to be corrected, sometimes being too slow to come to understand. And Jesus is patient with them and brings them along and says, no, understand. Like the desire is that you understand so that you can go and tell the world about what life looks like with me.
Yeah.
I love that. That's encouraging for me.
Yeah.
I'm a slow work of art.
I am too. And I love, again, I think Peter is one of my favorite people in the Bible because he is such a
dunce.
Yeah. He just doesn't get it so much. And so here you have this guy named Peter, right? And he falls and denies Christ 3 times. And then he comes back and, just chapters later, you see him stand in the Sanhedrin and say, hey guys, I'm going to follow God, not you, because you're man. You see the fear of God over the fear of man. And later on in Scripture, you see a different Peter.
Yeah.
Because Paul actually chastises him for the fear of man.
You see a failing Peter.
You see a failing Peter again, and it's in the same area. It's that same area of fearing man over fearing God. And Paul corrects him openly, publicly. And you see this guy like, okay, if God can work with a guy named Peter that just seems to miss it multiple times on the same subject. Like, we've learned this one. These aren't like new subjects, but he continues to work with Peter, and even it also helps me because knowing that tendency to fear man over God is crouching at the door, waiting to affect the way that you behave. And you see how it actually affects the way Peter behaves in the church. Because in the scenario with Paul, he's eating with people who are Judaizers, which basically said that you got to follow the law instead of grace. And Paul chastises him and says, why would you give this favoritism?
Quit being a hypocrite.
Quit being a hypocrite. Pretty amazing.
But also, okay, so then that just wraps back around to turn your eyes upon Jesus. It's a call. What is it calling us to do? It's calling us to turn our eyes upon Jesus, which assumes that we are going to sometimes forget to do that.
That's right.
Right? And we sang it as a church body, reminding each other that this is going to happen. Like, yes, it's crouching at the door. Sin is crouching at the door, and it is going to take any advantage. Surround yourself with people that are going to say, no, turn your eyes to Jesus. Because you're going to lose sight sometimes. Like, we are human. We are not glorified yet.
Yeah. Should we sing it here on
no.
the podcast?
Oh my gosh. So, we would have, the listenership would go.
You'd expose all of our voices.
Oh.
So.
Like I really did have this thought. I think it would have pressed us a little bit too far, but I actually thought about in the room on Sunday morning saying, hey, turn to your neighbor and sing it at them.
Yeah.
To remind them to turn their eyes upon Jesus. Look full into his wonderful face, and the things of this earth will go straight to him in the light of his glory and grace. But I thought it might have created some weird intimate moments.
So
we're not quite ready for that yet.
Not yet. Yeah,
we had a really Sky Jathani, who's just this wonderful thought leader in the church. I think just loves Jesus. Did a breakout session at No Regrets on Saturday about what is the church, and a lot of good things to process. One of the questions was, he said, "What's the foundation of the church?" He said, "In most modern churches, even think about our purpose statement, to be a Christ-centered community, helping people faithfully follow Jesus both locally and globally." He says most modern churches, the mission is the foundation, the mission of gospel sharing.
Right.
He said, but nowhere in Scripture is the mission the foundation. It's always Christ.
Right.
It's gathering and being in and with. I mean, this is Sky Jathani's book, is with, being with Christ is the central heartbeat. And that's one of the reasons that was just resonating in my head going into Sunday. And then to be able to sit in church and to make it so much about Jesus. That our eyes stray, our attention strays. But Jesus is the one that we want to be with and center ourselves. The more we're with Jesus, the more we're going to be about the mission of Jesus.
That's right.
It's like the mission is absolutely critical, but it's not the foundation. We are people of Christ,
right?
Which I loved, and the way we were able to sit in that in communion too, and flow into that, and just dwell.
And then Justin just did an incredible job in the benediction. He quoted from Colossians, which is the supremacy of Christ, and you're like, I'm fist pumping in the air in the back, like, yes, bring us to the supremacy of Jesus, because when we look at Christ, everything just kind of starts to fade away.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So,
do you wonder what it looks like to look full in his face like that? Those words. I can't wait for that, because I don't think we can yet.
No, I mean, now we see as a mirror dimly, then we will see fully.
Yeah.
And that should captivate our hearts. And it was just a reminder with Peter, struggling, growing, clearly growing through the Gospels, but still struggling. The moment of transformation was the resurrection, was being able to see the resurrected Christ. And after that continues to struggle.
But growing to do.
There's still sanctification, but for us as Christ followers, and if you're listening to this and you're wondering, like, man, what does it look like? Like, I don't know if I've looked in the face of Christ. Like, it's the resurrection. It's saying yes to the resurrected Christ, that you will follow him, that he will be your Lord and Savior, that you will spend your life seeking to know him more and fully. The resurrection needs to be that transformational moment for each of us.
Right.
And then to fix our eyes on Jesus, like Hebrews 12, is to fix our eyes on the resurrected Christ, who was crucified and now stands victorious at the right hand of God in glory. So, cool. Well, hey, we're gonna pivot real hard.
Let's pivot
and jump over we're gonna wrap up with a random question.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so not pivoting to any content of value.
Wow, I was hoping for something.
For one more thing.
Yeah.
No,
Here's one more thing for you.
Yeah, come on.
We're gonna pivot back.
We're going to pivot back. I was thinking
pendulum.
about the
Fake
difference
pivot.
between the apostles and the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Sanhedrin.
Ooh,
There's some similarities there, you guys.
for sure.
What's the difference? Their view of Jesus.
Yep.
So coming back to the same point, we're just circling around the drain here, but
Yeah.
like strong convictions,
Mhm.
right? Acting in accordance to their convictions. When I started making my little Venn diagram of the similarities, I was like, oh dang,
Ooh.
how easy that line would be to slip from one to the other, except for you keep turning your eyes into Jesus.
Although I
right?
will point out today's Monday, and so
Yeah.
Woodlands in the Word, Matthew 26,
Yeah.
Right.
crucifixion,
Mhm.
Jesus, and it starts off with the Pharisees unwilling to arrest Jesus in the temple courts because of the fear of man.
Yes.
They're
Do you think-
they're shaped by and defined by the fear of
They're
man.
afraid of.
And as
yeah,
I
an
thought
uprising.
about, I thought about these guys. I don't know why. Probably shouldn't spend as much time on the Pharisees, but we have words of description about them being enraged and about
Mhm.
them acting out of jealousy. Do you always recognize when you act out of jealousy
Yeah,
or
dude,
anger or rage?
I don't think they saw it.
I don't think they saw it.
No.
And so I don't want to say I have compassion on them. Maybe I do. Maybe I
Sure.
do.
They're
I do.
compassion.
They're
Yeah.
right. They're people trying to follow God
And made in the image
and
of Christ.
made in the
Or-
image of Christ, and
yeah.
but missing Jesus, missing the man.
Yeah.
Right?
Like Gamaliel, I
Yeah.
just kind of would love to hear the rest of the story
Right.
of Gamaliel. Like, did he ever turn to Christ, or did he ever what was the rest
was
of
the
his
motivation?
He
story?
was Paul's
here.
mentor, wasn't he?
He was Paul's
Paul,
mentor.
Paul studied under Gamaliel.
Yes. In fact, I've even thought about this. It's highly possible that Paul was even
Here.
present
Yeah.
and saw all of these things unfold, because he quickly sees the
Persecution,
Stephen
Right.
drama unfold, and he's there
It's
for
the next
that.
page, you guys.
Exactly. So I think about this guy Gamaliel, and I wonder if he saw the jealousy in the Sadducees, because they were the kind of the natural enemies of the Pharisees,
Mhm.
and I wonder if they saw it, and so that was what kind of brought about the if God is for this, you can't stop it, but
Mhm.
you don't want to work against God, and so you see this door crack open with this guy who's highly influential,
Mhm.
and I wonder what the rest of his story is. Historically, we can figure it out, but spiritually, what was the rest of his story?
Yeah.
You might get a chance to chat with
That'd
him
be
later.
amazing.
So, yeah, I mean,
so amazing.
if one of his key students
Yeah.
became, who
Mhm.
Paul was.
Wouldn't
so,
that make you think?
Yeah.
Did Paul ever go back and say, "Hey,
Right.
Gamaliel, let me show you the scriptures. Let me prove
Yeah.
the Messiah." They knew the scriptures well. He knew the scriptures well.
Or when Paul lands back in Jerusalem on
For sure.
trial, was Gamaliel there listening? Because every time Paul had an opportunity for the rest of this
Mhm.
book, once he converts, we're not there yet, but
Yeah.
every time he gets an opportunity to speak the gospel, he does.
he does, or did that add to Paul's
Fire, right?
Paul's fire that his
Yeah.
mentor is now trying to kill him?
Yeah.
So it's just the in between the stories is so.
That'd be a
fascinating.
fun, Christian fiction book to write. Like the
Yeah.
story of Gammy.
Hey, you
Like,
have a
I'm just
new
kidding. So-
storyline,
I
Dave.
have lots of storylines. Well, so,
Your
All
wish
right,
be
you can
granted.
pivot back to your.
All right, pivot
All
back
right,
to
random
the other
question.
thing.
Random question.
here doth go the spinner. So it spins. Easy question today. So if it lands on Whitney, when it lands on Whitney, that's all right. What's in it?
It's blue.
It's you, guess.
Yeah.
Oh, guest.
Yeah, bring it on.
Cool.
John, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?
I don't eat breakfast.
All right. Well, this has been Catholic ever.
I do make breakfast every morning for my kids.
Yeah.
This morning was scrambled eggs, fruit, and toast.
Oh, we have talked about this before.
Yes,
we have
that's
talked
kind of
about your
a-
breakfast creation
Yeah, it's a-
patterns.
It's a
That's
routine.
why I took a drink of water, because I wasn't going to call you out on what you talked about before.
But I did make breakfast.
You don't eat it. You just make
I
it.
don't
for
eat it.
them.
Yeah, I read. We sometimes read a devotional, but today I'm reading Woodlands in the Word, and so trying to read Woodlands in the Word.
It was
with the
so
kids.
long.
It was long, so we didn't
My
get
husband
through.
said too.
We didn't get through the whole chapter. We
Yeah.
got through the Garden of Gethsemane, and then that was where we stopped today.
Mhm.
You don't eat breakfast.
I don't eat breakfast.
Do you fast intentionally until lunch? Is that an intentional thing, or is it a health thing, or is it
It's a thing I've always done. I don't know that it was intentional. Like there was some spiritual reason, and so now I do fast till lunch. And if I don't have a reason to eat lunch, I won't. I'll just eat at dinner.
You don't eat until dinner. You eat once a day.
Sometimes.
Our young adults are going to start the practice of fasting.
Yeah.
And like the call is to try 24 hours to start with. And you just do that naturally sometimes.
I just do it.
That's amazing.
You're such a spiritual dude.
No.
The holiness of John.
So there's books called about intermittent fasting as a health thing, right? And so I do that on accident. I've done that on accident for many years. And for me,
it's how you keep your svelte figure.
That's right. Because it's not my eating habits. I'll tell you that much. But for me, if I'm gonna go have a meal, I want it to be with someone, and that's the purpose for eating, is to be with somebody else. That not to actually have food. So if I don't have someone to meet with, then I'll just go ahead and skip it.
Okay.
What'd you have for breakfast?
Yeah,
I had leftovers from last night. We made Brian actually harvested a deer late season, the beginning of last week, and so we made venison carnitas last night that were so good that I had to have them for breakfast.
That sounds amazing. Fantastic.
So,
do they reheat well? Like all the extra stuffs? Okay.
It's good.
All right.
Good. It's good.
I had a bowl of Cheerios. So.
That's what my daughter had.
Hot dog. Hot dog.
Breakfast for dinner. Sometimes I have dinner for breakfast. No, I had dinner for breakfast.
Yeah.
I do it the other way around.
I have scrambled eggs for lunch. So there we go.
There you
go. From dinner last night. So leftover.
You reheat scrambled eggs?
Yeah. It was amazing. No, it was from lunch yesterday. Came home, had lunch, scrambled eggs for lunch, and now reheating lunch from breakfast. Anyway, this has been Gavin Conversations. As you continue to listen to us, thank you for joining us. We'll maybe see you next week. So likely.
We'll see you regularly.
Week 4, regularly. We'll see you regularly. Bye.
Bye.